Good day, poker peeps. Sky with Smart Poker Study. Now, I know that you know that it's more than just your hole cards and the board that matters. The player you're up against is of extreme importance. So in this video, I'm going to give you 16 tips to help you play the player even better than you do now. You'll make better reads and better exploits, and of course, attain better results with these 16 tips. Let's roll. Gambate! Tip number 1 is observe their actions and make reads. Of course, you're doing this when you're involved in the hand, paying attention to pre-flop, flop, turn, and river actions, but continue to do this when you're not involved in the hand. Their actions clue you into their hand strength. You use that to make a read on what they want in the hand, and then you use that to make your exploitative plays. Now, the more tables you're playing, multi-tabling, the more difficult it is to observe the action, even when you're not involved in the hand. But make sure you're also not distracting yourself with email, Netflix, YouTube videos, other training videos, none of that jazz. Your attention when you're playing poker is devoted to the action at the table. And when you fold a hand, make sure you continue watching because you can learn from what's happening right there. You can often put yourself in that spot and ask, what would I do here? Like, let's imagine you folded ace-4 suited. The small blind decides to call. He checks, and then the open raiser checks behind on the flop. Whoa, that check smelled like weakness on that board. If I were the small blind player, I would come out firing. So just the fact that you're noodling on what's happening, that's going to develop your reads on the players involved, which will help you in future hands. Tip number 2 is to color code each player by player type as soon as possible. Now, you want to do this as soon as you get a read. Look around the table. When somebody limps him, tag him as a fish. Somebody buys in for just 30 big blinds, tag him as a fish. Someone's always topping off, tag them as a tight aggressive or a loose aggressive player. You see somebody 3-bet with Jack-9 suited? Loose aggressive player. So if we take a look at the screen right now, 55/9 player, yeah, that's a very loose passive player. I have him color-coded green as a fish. 23/23, yellow as a tag. 14/7 as a tag. My own stats, I'm a 40/30. If I was playing against myself, these statistics, I would tag this player as an orange loose aggressive player. We got another orange lag, 29/29 with a 3-bet at 22%. And over here, we have an 11/5, very nitty player, but I would give him that tight aggressive tag for now. By tagging your opponents this way, it gives you a really quick indication when you're in the middle of a hand, when you're thinking about entering a hand, who you're potentially up against. It's going to help you make better reads and better exploits. And of course, I said to do this as soon as possible. Well, yes, make that read. As soon as somebody limps in their very first hand, tag them as a fish. Maybe 20 hands later, they're playing a little bit differently. They've tightened up. They've done tons of open raising, no more limping. They've done some 3-bets. Yeah, maybe reclassify them at that point as a tight aggressive. Tip number 3 is to pay attention to HUD Statistics. Now, if you play online, you probably use Poker Tracker 4, and maybe you use my Smart HUD for Poker Tracker 4. Use that HUD as the tool that it is. Those statistics tell you your opponent's tendencies in various situations. When you know their tendencies, you can make a read on what you think they'll do in this spot, and then you make plays to exploit what they usually do. So for example, you see a player with 71% VPIP, they limp into the hand, you have ace-8 suited. Yeah, he's a fish. He's probably going to limp and then call your bet with a ton of weaker hands, weaker than that ace-8 suited. You got to ISO raise that player. And on another table, you 3-bet with pocket jacks. He called you, the flop comes down, you have an overpair, but he is not honest on flops. He often calls on the flop, does not fold to the c-bet. You have to c-bet for value on that flop. If he doesn't call, so be it. At least you tried for value in a spot where he generally doesn't like to fold. Tip number 4 is to game plan how you will exploit everyone. So game planning is looking around the table, judging everybody's tendencies, and then coming up with exploits for each of them. Now, I recommend that you have a piece of paper out in front of you, maybe your poker journal or something. Start with the player on your immediate right. Use their HUD stats, use their histories, use any showdown hands. Think about their weaknesses and how you can exploit them, and then write them down. While I'm playing, I often use like Excel to make these notes for myself. And when I'm making these notes, I write down their weakness just in regular text, but then I give myself a directive, all in caps, telling me what to do, how to exploit this weakness. So for example, you notice somebody is turn honest versus c-bets, meaning they fold versus the double barrel. You're going to put in your notes, double barrel bluff them, all in caps. Now, once you write down 2 or 3 exploits for the player on your right, go to the next player on the right, 2 or 3 more, the next one, the next one, the next one, until you get everybody around the table. Now you have a great game plan to exploit everybody. You are playing the player. Tip number 5 is to use poker's ultimate question, what's he doing this with? Now I call it poker's ultimate question because it can be used at any point in any hand after your opponent makes a play. In order to answer it properly, you need to take into account as much information as possible. A solid answer to this question, what's he doing this with? That's going to help you develop a great read on his hand strength and his range at the time. And with a great read comes great exploits. So for example, you defended the big blind versus a tight button raiser. You did it with 8-6 suited. The flop comes down, giving you a flush. Now you check to him with the plan of check raising. He bets really small. Well, what's he doing this with? It could be a single spade, the ace of spades, the queen of spades trying to bluff you. It could also be like a top pair hand trying to see where he's at in the hand. So what do? You check raise him and he calls. He called. What's he doing this with? He might have a flush already and he's kind of slow playing it, but most likely he has a single spade or one pair kind of a hand that doesn't want to fold just yet. Boom, on the turn, you come out firing, he calls again. Oh, what's he doing this with? Well, the turn wasn't the fourth spade, so he could still have some kind of a flush draw, but by thinking through this situation, putting him on a range, and gauging what he's making these various plays with, that helps you make more informed decisions on future streets. And you can often maximize the value you get with that info. Tip number 6 is to analyze one regular player each week. So you're going to pull up a player in Poker Tracker 4 who you just often play against. Review 20 or more of their showdown hands. As you're reviewing the hands, look for ways that you can attack and exploit their weaknesses. Once you find their weaknesses, do something like I do. I have this weaknesses and exploits journal. It's a part of my new Play the Player bootcamp. I keep track of various exploits by player type, and I'll just put down what their weakness is and then how I exploit it. And once again, it's all in caps telling me exactly what to do against these players. Now this leads us directly to create your own list of weaknesses and exploits to use. Because here's the thing, a weakness and exploit that works against this fish is probably going to work against this fish and this fish and this fish and this other fish. Any exploits that you devise against tight aggressive players, they'll probably work against most other tight aggressive players as well. So create your own journal, just like this, the weaknesses and exploits journal. I have it broken down by player type over here, and I simply list a ton of weaknesses and exploits. You can keep this ongoing through your years of study and even have this open while you're playing. Boom, when you're up against a fish, go to the fish section, look at the weakness and the various ways to exploit those weaknesses. And you're going to be playing the player like mad for the rest of your poker journey with a journal like this. Tip number 8 is, who is your target? Now you may not realize, but every play that you make targets somebody on the table. When you open raise, you target the 2 blinds. When you 3-bet, you target the open raiser. When you c-bet, you target the pre-flop caller. When you donk bet, you target the c-better. So you don't want to make plays, calls, bets, raises, checks, folds, just based on your hand at the time. Your opponent is of utmost importance. That's why, of course, these 16 tips for playing the player. So like before you open raise with Queen 4 suited on the button, take a look at the 2 blinds. They're the most likely callers. They're also the most likely 3-betters because everyone else is out of the hand, right? So you want to think about, what am I going to do if one of them 3-bets? Or first, are one of them capable of 3-bet bluffing? Have they 3-bet bluffed in the past? If one of them calls, what kind of post-flop tendencies do I have to exploit because my Queen 4 suited probably won't flop anything good? By taking your target into account, you can start planning out the rest of the hand, planning how you're going to get value or how you're going to bluff them off the hand. Tip number 9 is to put yourself in a spot to use an exploit. So you don't have to just wait for an opportunity. Remember that every play targets a player. Well, just make plays that target the exploit you want to use. For example, you don't normally open raise in the MP with 7-3 suited, but you take a look at that big blind player who's the most likely caller, and you know that he's turn honest. So if you open raise right now, he's probably going to call your flop c-bet, but then as soon as you bet on that turn after he checks the turn, he's probably going to fold. You're using his tendencies against him, and you're planning right now, yeah, 7-3 suited isn't a great hand, but I can put myself in a spot to build a pot to steal on the turn. So then boom, you open raise, it gets around to the big blind, and darn it, he folded. Actually, it's not the end of the world. You just picked up 1.5 big blinds with a simple 7-3 suited steal. So that's actually a good result. But the fact that you saw an exploit, made a play to put yourself in the spot to use the exploit, that's playing the player. Tip number 10 is to learn from showdown hands. So when a hand gets to showdown, whether you were involved or not, hit the little replay button. This allows you to go back through the hand, observe his actions, make reads on what he values in a hand, because now you know his hand strength when he called preflop, when he called the flop, when he called the turn, when he didn't bet on that river. And then when you see that he called those 2 streets with a crappy hand and didn't bluff the river, you get a really good sense that this guy's a fish. So tag him green, even if you're only just a couple hands into your relationship with this player. And that read will help you get more value from him in the future. Tip number 11 is to tag hands with learn a lesson. Now you can create your own hand tags in Poker Tracker 4. This is one of my hand tags and I absolutely love it. I use it quite a bit on Ignition because 24 hours later, you can download the hands with whole cards exposed. The fact that you get to see what the opponents had helps you develop your reads against that certain player type in the future. And this is great even if you're not on Ignition. When you tag a hand with learn a lesson, when you review those hands later on, you do the hand reading. You put your opponent on a range. You narrow that range through the street. It's going to improve your strategies. So for example, I had a hand where I had a great opportunity to cold 4-bet bluff because I suspected weakness due to that tiny little 3-bet squeeze. There was an open raise for 2.2 big blinds, a call for 2.2 big blinds, and then this loose aggressive player raised it to 7 big blinds. Felt like total weakness. I had the ace queen off. I wasn't sure if I should do it. I folded the hand and I tagged it with learn a lesson. 24 hours later, boom, download the hand, and I see that that loose aggressive player had 10-9 suited. My instinct to cold 4-bet bluff the player, maybe making it 25, 26 big blinds, it was a good instinct. Too bad I didn't pull the trigger, but I learned from it because I tagged it and I reviewed this hand later on. Tip number 12 is to do what he doesn't want you to do. So when you're observing the action, you're in the middle of a hand, and you suspect that, hey, this guy's got a marginal hand. It's probably a weak pair or a very weak draw. He probably doesn't want me to attack, so I'll attack! So you're going to do the thing that they would hate to see. They don't want you to 3-bet? Do it! They want a cheap showdown? Don't let them see it cheaply. They want a free turn card? Not on your life! So like when you 3-bet preflop out of the small blind with queen 10 suited and they call, there's a good chance they called with other just high card, ace high, king high, maybe some other queen high hands. So when that baby card board comes out, a lot of their range absolutely missed it. Go ahead and fire the c-bet, make it something greater than half pot. Think to yourself, well, what would I do with pocket aces here? I'd probably bet roughly 12 into 20. Do it! Send the message that you got the goods, his range doesn't connect, he doesn't want to face a bet, make the bet. Make him fold. Tip number 13 is one of my favorites. Exploit their exploits. So you're using their exploits against them. When you're observing the action and you see something that looks like they're trying to make a play against somebody else, jump in there and do something about it. If it looks like they are ISO raising to get a weak limper heads up all to himself, come in with a 3-bet bluff. He's going to hate seeing that because he wanted that fish to himself. You're not going to allow it though. Or if you suspect they're 3-bet bluffing, what do? Come in for a cold 4-bet bluff. Do that thing they don't want you to do and exploit their exploit. Tip number 14 is to take player notes, but remember to use them. So you're paying attention, learning from showdowns, devising ways to exploit their weaknesses, and you're probably taking notes in the Poker Tracker 4 note editor. Now, those notes are useful to help you remember what's going on, but you're not going to remember them if you never check the notes again. And I'm guilty of this for myself. Making a note, not checking it, failing in a future hand. So for example, recently I took a player note about how a fishy player could not fold a top pair hand. Later on, I was in a spot where I didn't hold anything at all, was trying to bluff the player off the hand, so I triple barrel bluffed him in a spot where my sizing and his calls should have told me that he had a top pair hand. I should have known, or I should have remembered, that he doesn't fold top pair hands, and yet I just spewed chips with a triple barrel bluff. Really disappointed in that play. The fact that I did not look at my notes. Tip number 15 is to strive for in-position play, especially versus strong players. Now, position is a huge advantage. It's an information advantage. It's a time advantage as well, because while he's thinking and timing down, that gives you time to think. Once he checks or whatever play he makes, now you have your own time. Your own clock is counting down. Plus, you get to pot control when you're in position. So it's such a big advantage. When you're up against the strongest players, try to limit the times you purposefully play out of position against them. Basically, don't defend the blinds as often versus the strong players, but attack them when you're in position. Open raise when they're in the blinds. 3-bet when you're on the cutoff or button. Call their open raises when you're in the cutoff or button so you can exploit them post-flop with position. This is the easiest way to play the player when you're up against a strong player. Tip number 16 is to enroll in my brand new Play the Player Bootcamp. You're going to learn to spot player weaknesses and exploit them. It's a 7-day bootcamp. Days 1 through 5 are the meat of it, and it's 2 hours per day of playing with purpose, then studying with purpose to build your observation skills, build your reading skills, and build your exploiting skills. I expand further on all 15 tips that you got out of this podcast episode, and you see a ton of hand examples and player examples how I make reads and exploit my opponents. So if you're ready to play the player better than ever before, and you're willing to devote 2 hours per day for 7 days, this is the bootcamp for you. Just click the link in the description down below, or there's the URL on the page right now for you. Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video if you like the video. Leave a comment down below with your favorite Play the Player tip, or even a tip that I didn't give in this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.